Member for Gwadja.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak on the Teacher Registration Legislation Amendment Bill 2025, which seeks to amend information sharing arrangements, broaden the scope of teacher registration to include early childhood educators, and amend the registration requirements and standards to include languages other than English. The bill does also amend powers to the Minister, the Chief Executive of the Department of Education, in relation to the functions and responsibilities of the Teacher Registration Board. There are several aspects, Madam Speaker, of this bill that Territory Labor broadly supports, which I will first speak to. Child safety in information sharing is of the utmost importance when it comes to childcare, classrooms and, of course, our teachers. Strengthening child safety measures in schools and early childhood services is critical for stronger and safer outcomes for the whole of the Northern Territory. The broader information sharing arrangements, Madam Speaker, in this bill expand the board's powers to enable them to be more proactive, vigilant when it comes to protecting kids from harm. The board will also be able to share information with the regulatory authorities and other registration authorities to prevent harm or manage risks of harm. The opposition unequivocally supports strengthening the measures to increase child safety within our education system. There is a united goal across the country at a time when we've seen horrific reported incidences of harm and abuse to very young children. Parents across the Territory deserve to know that when they drop their kids off at childcare, they'll come home safe and happy at the end of the day. Devastatingly, the Northern Territory is not immune from these concerns, and sadly, our communities have felt the impacts here in our childcare centres. We know that regulation of childcare centres is a national and local concern. Safety for children is paramount. Childcare centres should be a place of safety, learning and certainly joy. Territorians need to be able to trust that the systems, policies and legislation in our education sectors prioritise child safety and takes measures to protect kids. The opposition welcomes efforts to strengthen the board and proactively disclose information to regulatory authorities in order to prevent harm. Territory Labor fully backs in efforts to improve oversight and regulation of this sector. Under Labor, the 2023 Education Act amendments commenced work to improve child safety and wellbeing in schools, contemporise registration and assessment processes. We support the aspects of this bill that improve information sharing in order to improve child safety. It's measures like this that must continue to be built on to protect children in the Northern Territory. And Madam Speaker, protecting children is everyone's business. We welcome the decision to send this particular bill to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee, of which I am a member, but it is a great shame, Madam Speaker, that this process, rarely used by the CLP, was not done in a way that maximised its purpose. A significant theme emerged from witness testimony in the scrutiny process of their unease and disappointment regarding the consultation process. Multiple witnesses felt the timeframe in which to meaningfully engage in the scrutiny process was poor and limited. If the CLP were serious about child safety and serious about implementing real and lasting measures to better protect Territory kids, you'd think they would have taken this scrutiny process seriously. This bill is only one of 8 or 9 out of hundreds that could have been sent to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee. It is yet another example of the poor government and poor consultation this government has when it comes to this particular legislation. The CLP say they want better outcomes for our children, but their actions spell something very different. The short timeframe for stakeholders, witnesses and experts to engage and participate in the legislative scrutiny process failed to allow for genuine, comprehensive and culturally appropriate input. I am on that committee, as I've said, Madam Speaker. I heard firsthand the concerns with some of the elements of this bill. Because of the time restrictions and rush processes, there was little opportunity for wide-ranging consultation with the sector that will be impacted the most by this bill. There are a number of elements in this bill that need further consultation, consideration and feedback from Territorians to ensure that the proposed amendments are fit for purpose. Madam Speaker, I'd like to take the opportunity to step through these concerns now. Territory Labor believes there should absolutely be the appropriate recognition, oversight, registration and support for hard-working staff in early childhood education and care. Strengthening the teacher registration network is essential to building a foundation upon which child safety standards can be taken seriously. All of our early childhood education staff deserve to be recognised professionally alongside their peers. The work, the preparation, the delivery of high-quality education and care for our youngsters is tough work. It's nuanced work, and our teachers need to be recognised and supported for their particular skills and expertise. This bill introduces the one teacher, one profession model. Madam Speaker, this means the registration of early childhood educators will now be brought under the same umbrella as primary and secondary teachers. Territory Labor holds concerns that this model might not be fit for purpose in the NT. The opposition are concerned that the early childhood educators will not be specifically recognised as professionals specialising in early learning and development. At a time when Commonwealth laws are being introduced, increasing regulation, this is risky. We believe further consultation with the sector is required to understand if the one teacher, one profession model is fit for purpose in the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, where is the CLP consultation on how this model should be implemented for the NT? How has the CLP sought feedback from stakeholders on how this model will impact the sector? The short timeframe and limited witnesses in the legislative scrutiny process is not good enough. The opposition heard concerns from stakeholders about the potential adverse outcomes the one teacher, one profession model will have on early childhood educators' registration. The proposed model may impact on the already low number of early childhood educators as it provides flexibility for them to move into the school setting. Teaching is a regulated profession, and it comes with benchmarks for entry that takes into account the complexity of the jobs in schools. The intensity of classroom educating, providing safe and conducive learning environments for kids of all abilities is part of the territory, especially for those students who need extra assistance, who may be struggling with learning challenges, have mental health concerns or disabilities, or live in remote communities. This intensity is not going to alleviate. The opposition believes that this government has more work to do to hear from the stakeholders about nuances relating to the registration standards for early childhood educators and primary and secondary teachers. The Education Accreditation Framework is based on consultation and agreement across jurisdictions about the appropriate standards and requirements for teachers to become registered and certified, ready to teach and be in those complex classroom environments. The fundamental requirements for the teacher registration have been established, and they are there to make sure that the board has the confidence in who is in the classroom, and so that parents, Madam Speaker, have the confidence that the person teaching their child is qualified and capable. The framework sets standards, and they are there to make sure that they have the particular skills and expertise fundamental to teaching in early childhood education settings. To have any dilution from this framework and registration process is not preparing new teachers. It is not preparing new teachers for the complexity and intensity of the work. The one teacher, one profession model setting could absolutely fail our educators. The CLP doesn't know if this model is the right path or not. They have failed to do the appropriate consultation and engagement with the sector to find out. They have failed to listen to stakeholders who raised these concerns in the public scrutiny hearing. Territory Labor heard from stakeholders and also heard from witnesses at the public hearing that they support and recommend a distinct early childhood specialist registration category rather than one teacher, one profession. This approach would recognise the early childhood development, training and qualifications separately to primary and secondary teachers. The CLP government need to consult with Territorians to know whether the measures in this bill are enough to ensure that the NT's legislative requirements meet the National Quality Framework standards for early childhood education. Will this model be enough, Madam Speaker? And will it allow for improvements to the regulation of early childhood education services that we desperately need? One of the biggest alarm bells in this bill is the blurring of the impartiality and independence of the Teacher Registration Board. The TRB's mandate is to drive the quality, profession and the status of the teaching profession in the Northern Territory, which is critically important to every student's educational progress and achievement. Given its responsibility for registering and authorising teachers and managing professional conduct matters, it is crucial that it is able to operate free from political or bureaucratic interference and influence. The opposition does not support the TRB setting within the Department of Education rather than operating as a standalone entity. Territory Labor does not support the increased and legislative ministerial powers. The CLP claim these changes will clarify functions and responsibilities, but there is little evidence to support that claim, Madam Speaker. If the Minister does have the evidence, then I strongly encourage her to share it with us tonight. If this is nothing more than a cost-cutting exercise at the expense of a strong, independent TRB, then she should be honest about that. What we do know is that the Minister has done no consultation or work to ensure that the necessary independence of the TRB will be maintained under this new structure. It is yet another example of the government's disregard for integrity, accountability and transparency. Stakeholders have raised and continue to raise serious concerns about the regulatory intent of this bill. Madam Speaker, for example, the Association of Independent Schools of the Northern Territory had these concerns. While the Director is accountable to the Board for statutory functions, this dual reporting line creates ambiguity and potential conflict, particularly when the regulatory decisions involve departmental employees or intersects with the broader departmental interests. This structure does not sufficiently separate the regulation of teachers from the operations of the department. It risks compromising the transparency and impartiality of the TRB. Essentially, Madam Speaker, this bill means the regulator will be regulating itself. The independence of the TRB from the Department of Education and the Minister is crucial. The Department of Education is the largest employer of teachers in the Territory. How can the community have confidence that we will be able to separate out its dual roles managing the teaching workforce at the same time as regulating? It is just another example of the CLP legislation that erodes public confidence and professional confidence in the government's integrity and commitment to accountability. The CLP need to do the work to understand why it is so important for the Northern Territory to have an independent regulatory body separate from the Department of Education and the adequate resourcing to set it up. As it stands, Territory Labor has no confidence that the government's governance structure or risk mitigation frameworks exist for when the Minister gets involved. We have heard nothing about how the CLP are going to reassure the community that the risk management strategies will be robust and in place to ensure that the Teacher Registration Board integrity and independence remains. This is the type of governance Territorians have come to expect. Labor supports, Madam Speaker, the increased flexibility and broader pathways into teaching registration through the mechanisms like the authority to teach exemptions. While Territory Labor supports the streamlining of administrative processes, such as the expansion of the renewal period of authority to teach exemptions from 12 months to 2 years, Labor is concerned that there will be some intended consequences from the aspects of the authority to teach amendments. Territory Labor has been and will continue to be a strong advocate for the invaluable contribution of Aboriginal Territorians in our education system. We cannot afford to take our foot off the gas when it comes to recognising and supporting the strengths that our teachers, especially Aboriginal teachers, bring to Territory remote classrooms. Supporting accessible, engaged and quality learning means targeted investing in infrastructure, workforce, training and career pathways as well as wellbeing. I am concerned that reliance on the authority to teach exemptions may provide greater avenues for pathways to employment for Aboriginal language specialists in remote communities in the short term, but be detrimental in the long term. Madam Speaker, we want Aboriginal teachers, especially in remote communities, to become qualified teachers and teachers' assistants, with the professional supports in place to lead greater employment equity. If the right structures and supports are not in place to monitor the use of these exemptions in remote communities, this amendment could actually hinder local employment. We want to see more supported pathways into the education workforce for Aboriginal Territorians and remote communities. Support local employment drives stability, equity, sustainable service delivery and long-term investments in communities. We support this amendment but reiterate that it needs to be accompanied by a robust structure for decision-making. The Department of Education, Madam Speaker, needs to work with the Aboriginal Interpreter Service to establish recognised and culturally informed accreditation processes. Territorians, teachers and the education sector need further clarification about how the amendments regarding the authority to teach exemptions will impact assessments. How will applicants know they are being assessed for an exemption? What is the renewal process for exemptions? What do these changes mean on the ground in practical terms? Labor supports the bill where we are working with the government, but we must make sure that these amendments are robust and meaningful. Amendments that lack detail, operational clarity and robust consultation with the sector are going to be concerning. Madam Speaker, we support greater flexibility to increase teacher workforce for those with specialist subjects, but there needs to be clear, transparent and publicly accessible benchmarks to ensure consistency and fairness. Labor supports this bill in principle. We are supportive of the measures to strengthen child safety, such as increased information sharing options. There are a number of elements that we require considerably more consultation to ensure this bill is fit for purpose. Amendments such as the exemptions need to be carefully worked through to make sure that they are limited unintended consequences for our remote educational workforce. Territory Labor strongly advocates against an arm's-length TRB model that could compromise the independence and impartiality needed for a regulatory body, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's also incredibly important, again, to acknowledge and just tonight recognise the amazing contributions of all our education staff across the Northern Territory. Throughout the Legislative Scrutiny Committee's process, we did learn that the Department of Education currently has no formal recognition or qualification for language speakers. We have an amazing opportunity to embed that relationship with the Department of Education and the amazing Northern Territory Aboriginal Interpreter Service to formally recognise those educators in our schools for a number of reasons. To recognise their opportunities for development and for employment. To have them recognised as fluent Aboriginal interpreters gives them a greater opportunity for jobs in their local community, but also gives parents a clear understanding that their children are being spoken to in mother tongue, their appropriate language, to the highest standard. It is absolutely alarming that the Department of Education has no formal process other than schools individually having to say that they are satisfied. This is an opportunity for the Education Department to work with the Aboriginal Interpreter Service to formalise a process to help pay to have our amazing educators who teach in First Nations language across the Territory to have their skills recognised and embedded so that they can work in those schools, they can be interpreters for health matters, they can be interpreters in our court systems, they can be interpreters in local government spaces, an important opportunity. Madam Speaker, I want to acknowledge, of course, the Legislative Scrutiny Committee who did do an amazing job in such a very, very short time frame to pull this together, to have submissions, to have the hearings. I want to recognise and and say thank you to all of the work that the Secretariat. Of course, again, I do want to acknowledge the bipartisanship of that committee to work through within that time frame. I think it was important. Again, there are many aspects of the bill that we are supportive of. There are areas that we do have concerns with. And tonight it is an amazing opportunity, while we are talking about the teacher registration, to just acknowledge our amazing Territory educators, our principals, our teachers, our assistant teachers, our families as first teachers, all of our support staff across every Territory school does an absolutely amazing job each and every day to support Territory kids to get the best chance they can have at having a bigger and brighter future through education. Education absolutely is the way that we can change the trajectory of our Territory, and getting everyone involved in participating in the education space is not only an amazing opportunity for us, it's an amazing opportunity for each and every Territorian. To do that, I want to acknowledge as well, through this process and through the opposition, talking to teachers right across the Northern Territory. Thank you for everything that you do. We see you, we hear you, we value you. There are a number of changes in this legislation, absolutely acknowledging, that are going to streamline the processes and make it easier. Of course, the safety of Territory children is always paramount. Letting more Aboriginal staff into schools and classrooms is not a bad thing. It is not jeopardising a child's safety. It is absolutely embedding the cultural safety. It is embedding amazing principles to help our children get the best chance that they can. There are rigorous processes already in place and will remain in place when this bill passes to ensure that every single person going into a Territory school has the appropriate checks and balances to ensure that Territory kids are safe every day when they rock up to school. I want to thank all of the educational institutions and facilities and organisations who did come to the committee to give testimony. Thank you for your incredible work. Thank you to the Territory's education unions who stand up each and every day to support our hard-working, amazing teachers in the school right across the Northern Territory. And again, the hearing was a great opportunity to hear about the wonderful makeup of the Northern Territory's education system. Private schools, public schools, faith-based schools, independent schools, homeland schools. Every single one of those schools plays an important role in shaping the future of our next generations of Territorians. So, Madam Speaker, I do, of course, acknowledge the hard work of the Department of Education. I want to give a huge shout out to the Teacher Registration Board. I know that they do a huge volume of work assessing, looking at complaints, looking at registrations, and I want to thank them for that. I do also want to again just thank all of the members of the Legislative Scrutiny Committee who did participate in that process. An important piece of work that was done very respectfully by all of the committee members, and I just wanted to take the time to acknowledge that. We agreed on a number of aspects of the inquiry. I only provided a dissenting report into that process, Madam Speaker, as I wanted to ensure that the voices of people who did give testimony wasn't lost and it was elevated when it came to their concerns around the short time frames, and some people felt that it did risk cultural safety because they didn't have enough time to talk to some of their communities and stakeholders beyond the boundaries of the Darwin Greater Region. So I just wanted to thank everyone for that and thank my fellow committee members for the bill. Thank you.
Member for Fanny Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to speak on the 2025 amendments to the Teacher Registration Bill. It's legislation that I absolutely believe marks a pivotal moment for education in the Northern Territory. Madam Speaker, these amendments show a government that takes teacher registration and child safety seriously, something that may come as a refreshing change for those of us who recall when registering a teacher seemed about as consistent as a fully functioning sprinkler system in the dry season under the previous Labor administration. This bill reaffirms our government's deep commitment to child safety, professional excellence and the future strength of our teacher workforce. At its core, this bill mandates the registration of all early childhood teachers by the end of 2026, strengthening child safety in the earliest, most formative years of education. By ensuring that every educator in early childhood settings meets stringent registration criteria, we are protecting our most vulnerable children from unqualified or unsuitable persons having access to childcare and learning environments. This move is not merely bureaucratic. It's fundamental to the duty we owe to every child entrusted in our schools and services. Beyond registration, the bill advances critical reforms, facilitating improved information sharing. The Teacher Registration Board will be empowered to exchange registration information across jurisdictions with relevant regulatory bodies if there is reasonable belief that it will prevent harm to a child. This addresses a troubling loophole highlighted by the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, which exposed how a lack of communication between teacher registration authorities allowed some individuals to evade scrutiny and moving between states and territories. Our amendments decisively close this gap, fostering a culture of transparency and rapid action to protect children no matter where they learn. Governance is also clarified and strengthened. The bill better defines the Minister's policy setting powers and the Chief Executive's role in managing the TRB's performance, all while preserving the Board's independence in regulating the profession. This clear separation of powers and accountability ensures the Board operates with integrity and effectiveness, free from undue influence, while still being supported by the Department of Education and Training. Madam Speaker, it is important to know that national consistency is a guiding principle in these reforms. By aligning minimum qualifications, currency of practice, and English language proficiency with the framework for teacher registration in Australia, the Northern Territory aligns itself fully with national standards. This framework, agreed upon by all education ministers in 2024, guarantees that our teachers are professionally equipped and culturally responsive to meet contemporary educational demands. Moreover, the bill introduces a two-way registration system, provisional and full registration. The system supports new graduates and those returning to teaching with structured supervised induction periods before granting full registration, ensuring that teachers are fully prepared to provide high-quality education from day one. This protects students and bolsters confidence in our teaching workforce. Importantly, the amendments modernise the language and inclusivity of our laws by replacing foreign languages with languages other than English, explicitly recognising Aboriginal languages as specialist subjects. This change facilitates employment authorities for unregistered persons teaching Aboriginal languages where registered teachers are unavailable or do not have the appropriate knowledge, supporting the cultural and linguistic richness of our region while providing pathways for Aboriginal educators to become fully registered under programs like the Remote Aboriginal Teacher Education, or RATE, as many people know it. Currently, Madam Speaker, approximately 5,500 teachers are registered, with over 200 unregistered but authorised to teach. This means that 4% of our teaching workforce operates under employment authorities, many of whom teach specialist subjects such as vocational education or Aboriginal languages. This bill removes outdated expiry limitations for these authorities, streamlining processes, reducing administrative burden, which many of you know is my favourite thing to do, and allowing authorities to be tailored to employment terms of up to 2 years. These changes promote flexibility without compromising the quality or safety of teaching. Child safety remains the absolute cornerstone of these reforms. It seems that previous efforts to safeguard our children and regulate our teachers were, shall we say, still in provisional registration mode, whereas this government is committed to full registration, full accountability and full protection. The legislation protects whistleblowers and encourages a culture where safeguarding students is paramount. The enhanced powers for the TRB to manage complaints, conduct investigations and share critical information ensure that those who seek to compromise our children will be identified and prevented from teaching. The Royal Commission's warnings about inconsistent information sharing are addressed squarely, reducing risk and enhancing protective oversight. Additionally, there are benefits for a closer relationship between the Department of Education and the TRB, with enhancements in the space of support and staffing services and the streamlining of processes and understanding the teacher workforce and existing support for teachers. The intent of preserving the independence of the TRB and the Director of the TRB with respect to their statutory roles in regulating the teaching profession. What we are attempting to do is to provide more clarity around the separation of powers. It's not changing anything specifically in the Act. It's making it obvious that there is a very clear separation between employees and the board under the PSEMA, as well as the roles and responsibilities of the CE and the Minister. Madam Speaker, these amendments align with minimum qualifications, currency of practice and English language proficiency requirements with the framework for teacher registration in Australia. As I stated earlier, the adoption of this framework was agreed by all education ministers in September 2024, and under these reforms, only early childhood teachers who meet the minimum requirements reflected in the framework will be eligible for registration. Finally, Madam Speaker, this bill is not just administrative reform. These amendments commit to this government's desire to cut red tape and reduce administrative burden for teachers and educational staff, honouring our government's promise to minimise administrative burdens on our frontline workers. For those that remember my maiden speech right here in this chamber, they'll remember my passion and commitment for reducing administrative burden to all of frontline staff, and it definitely includes teachers, school staff and staff in the Department of Education and Training. Efficient registration processes and clear regulatory expectations mean teachers can focus on what truly matters, educating our children in safe, supportive and inspiring environments. Madam Speaker, these amendments embody a comprehensive reform agenda. They deliver strong child safety measures, elevate professional standards, reconnect governance responsibilities with clear roles and foster inclusivity through recognition of Aboriginal languages and diverse teaching pathways. This bill is a robust framework that protects our children, supports our teachers and strengthens the backbone of education in the Northern Territory. It is a commitment to students, parents, carers and teachers across the Territory that education and child safety is a foundation for a strong, vibrant community. Madam Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Are there any more speakers? Member for Johnston.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I also rise today to speak in support of this bill. It's an important piece of legislation and I support the committee's recommendation, of which I'm a part, that it be passed. But as members may know, I also submitted a dissenting report, or what I sometimes like to call an additional report, to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee. And that report wasn't about opposing the bill. It was about making sure that the voices of the people that this bill most affects are actually heard, the voices of teachers, of principals, of unions, of Aboriginal educators and sector representatives, and that the issues that they raised weren't lost in that final report. There are matters that need attention, and as we move, or as the government moves into implementation, I just want to briefly touch on some of them here. I do want to acknowledge also that education is one of the most important responsibilities we have as a parliament, and at the centre of it all and at the heart of it all are teachers. Their professionalism, their cultural knowledge and their commitment to our Territory children are the backbone of our education system, and any legislative change that we make must strengthen the profession, not complicate it, not undermine it. So throughout, when we held the inquiry, stakeholders raised many issues. When I went through the submissions and when we held the inquiry, I counted 13 separate issues, and only a few of these were captured in our recommendations. While we did capture things like equivalency criteria, information sharing guidance and English proficiency, there were many other things that we didn't cover. So these include no early childhood specialist registration category, concerns about conditional registration, risks around lowering qualification standards, the need for flexibility in the transition period, pathways for Aboriginal language and vet teachers, no requirement for Aboriginal community consultation, no formal Indigenous language proficiency framework, questions about the independence of the board, the need for an implementation plan, and concerns about the rushed consultation overall. So these points came directly from people working on the ground, and I think we owe it to them to take these views seriously. One of the issues that came up with several witnesses was the need for flexibility in the 12-month transitional exemption period. Some witnesses said that would not be an issue for them, but they did understand that it may be for others. What works in an urban school doesn't always work in a remote one. Many teachers in remote communities rely on bridging or equivalency pathways, and for some of them, 12 months won't be long enough. The bill does recognise Aboriginal languages as specialist subjects, and it recognises them as a language, which is welcome. But recognition is not enough if there's no clear pathway for Aboriginal language educators to become registered. Right now, we don't have a territory-wide culturally informed accreditation process. The department recognised this when they gave evidence, and stakeholders who gave us evidence supported creating one. A formal framework for assessing Aboriginal language proficiency is essential for bilingual education, for creating local employment pathways, and for protecting Aboriginal languages and culture. It's crucial work. We also heard from many of the stakeholders that consultation was too rushed, and if we want these reforms to work effectively in all communities, including in remote and Aboriginal communities, we need to make sure that we're involving them properly in the way that bills are designed. That's something that hopefully will happen as part of the implementation and rollout of this bill. Most of the witnesses raised concerns about the independence of the Teacher Registration Board and the Director, given that the Director is employed and performance managed by the CEO of the department, the largest employer of teachers in the Territory. And things may be working well now. We did talk about this during the inquiry, but that doesn't mean they always will, and we need to make sure that independence is protected and it's visible. We need more transparent guidelines on how conflicts are managed and how concerns can be raised. That's not a complicated issue, it's just good governance. And some stakeholders told us that they struggled to participate in the inquiry because the consultation period was too short. We've heard about that in this chamber already. It's great that this bill was referred to the Scrutiny Committee. It's the job of the committee to hear from people, to inform the chamber about how a bill may or may not work. It's really important that we have the proper scope to do that well. It's important for all of us here. It's something there that's to serve us. It's not something to undermine our work. Madam Speaker, despite these concerns, I support this bill. These are necessary reforms and they will work to modernise our teacher registration framework. But I just want to say again that the issues raised in my additional report and issues raised by people who gave us evidence shouldn't be left behind now that we are passing that bill. They're practical issues, they're reasonable issues, and they're grounded in real experience. As we've heard in this chamber before, at the end of the day, teachers are at the heart of our education system, and we need to make sure that the reforms that we are making are going to support them as strongly and well as possible. So I trust that when this bill does pass and it's implemented, that the government will take all of these matters seriously as that implementation gets underway. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Fong Lim.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The focus areas of this legislation are about child safety, about regulatory integrity, and about efficiencies and alignment with national frameworks. Some of those are matters that are set to be addressed upon commencement. Other matters are delayed, like clauses 29 to 38. My colleague, the member for Fanny Bay, has already neatly summarised a lot of the strengths of the legislation. And part 2, the matters that would come into effect after assent on information sharing, strengthening integrity and national consistency are broadly agreed upon by everyone as a good step forward. And the part 3, clauses 29 to 38, measures on mandatory registration for early childhood teachers, likewise agreed upon as useful, albeit matters that will be addressed a year or so from now. I am grateful to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee as well for their work in this space, and I had the opportunity to read the majority report and the 2 additional, as the member for Johnson would have it, reports, and I think it's great that there was an expansion of the scope for looking forward to what we might do in this space to be constructive. I think the reason I've chosen to speak tonight is because this bill, in isolation, isn't particularly controversial. There are small things that can be refined. There are 1 percentile improvements, perhaps some 5 percentile improvements. But I rose tonight to speak because I think it's important to honestly recognise that this is a piece of the broader puzzle to improve public education and education outcomes in the Northern Territory. And at the risk of being contrary on a bill where there is broad consensus that we will support it, to not just extend platitudes, not just to recognise our schools and wonderful educators, wonderful though they might be, but actually to do a little bit of a stock take and see where this fits in the broader picture. Because the fact is, our public education system is not tracking as well as we would like it to track. And I think we are on the verge of significant changes at the moment. Next year will be a major year in education reform, and it's important for us to put these matters in context to understand where we're at and where we go from here. Now, this government is trying very hard to strengthen teacher workforce, and it is committed to attracting and keeping teachers through all the work that it's doing, to fixing education, and very directly to getting kids back in school. Honestly speaking, all the gnashing of teeth about the 1 percentile stuff that I hear from some of the concerns about the bill are no longer of concern to me in the broader equation. What I'm more interested in now is how we start turning public education around, given that actually we can keep on saying, you know, this 1 percentile will improve things, but actually there are broader structural forces that we need to address, and we do have to have some eye to history and what has been happening in education for the best part of a decade now. Now, streamlining processes and reducing administrative obstacles are really important. The member for Fanny Bay has outlined how some of that will happen, as with strengthening of regulatory integrity and the mandating of registration of early childhood, and again, creating national consistency and improving information sharing, all of which I applaud. I'm all for doing things that bring us into accord with the national standard. Child safety will be strengthened by mandating professional registration for qualified teachers. We will introduce and strengthen child safety by improving information sharing with other jurisdictions, and that will prevent harm in the long run. And the bill will strengthen regulatory integrity by tightening up things to do with the TRB, the Teacher Registration Board, albeit there are, again, concerns about the centralisation of power and decision-making in some regards. Now, here is a sad, but, well, perhaps not sad, here is a reality check for everyone. The centralisation of power is happening the world over, parliaments over, across Australia in actual fact. And to some extent now, I'm less about fighting it the whole time and starting to think about, okay, well, if we are going to centralise power and mechanisms, then how do we still ensure we get good outcomes, or quite frankly, better outcomes than we've been getting? Because we have tried a number of mechanisms now to try and create all of the rigour in the world. And actually, I'm not just concerned with respect to failing our educators, as it was put by one of my colleagues, or to one teacher, one profession, but to thinking more generally about concerns with the education system writ large. Now, as I said, alignment with the National Framework for Teacher Registration, great thing. Again, amendments in the bill to ensure Aboriginal languages are captured as a specialist subject, a great matter. and the amendment recognises the importance of Aboriginal teachers and the teaching of students in their first language, and it supports those flexible employment options for remote schools. Again, flexibility, there is an interaction here with flexibility in the labour market for us. We have to actually start thinking in a place of small population and limited options about how we create regulatory efficiency by reducing administrative burden. So there are a number of interactions here. This isn't just a bureaucratic piece about registration and child safety. It's part of the broader ecosystem of understanding where our public education system is at. And this bill will streamline registration processes, and thereby it will create some flexibility for employers to seek authority, for example, to employ an unregistered person to teach specialist subjects, which is important in the vet space, which is important for individuals working towards gaining teaching qualifications. Now, look, all of this said, the question might be, well, why is this of such interest to me? Well, it's of interest to me not necessarily because my electorate is one replete with schools. The fact of the matter is my electorate has very few schools, but they represent the polarities of our system, and they represent and illustrate neatly some of the systemic problems that we have at the moment. So on one end of the spectrum, I have a school like Haileybury Rendell School, a high-performance private school with fantastic opportunities for its kids. You know, in addition to delivering high on core curriculum, it has all manner of extracurricular options available to people there. And it's been my great pleasure to be involved with that school and to be able to do high value-adding tasks there where I can, and to be part of their community and contribute where possible. But the extent of my interaction, or our interaction with them to some extent, is about preventing things like the Berrima Road duplication to ensure that the school is not disrupted. But on the other end of the continuum, I have a great investment in public education, as many of you know, and as I've said before, I'm the product of 5 public schools in the Northern Territory. And the fact is, the equality of opportunity that I got going through schools historically, like Anula and Karama and Sanderson and Casuarina, gave me a fair go to realise my own potential. And that was the case for generations past. And I'm not convinced it's the case for generations going forward now. And there is ample evidence to suggest that's the case. And that's why we have to be making the kind of moves that we are making in these kind of spaces to try and think in a more agile way about, well, how do we attract and retain teachers? How do we integrate better with our labour market? How do we actually deliver for not just educators, but for kids? Because right now the numbers don't make for great reading. And the numbers don't make for great reading based on 15 months of what this government has been doing. The numbers don't make for great reading based on the last 10 years of governance in this place. And in that regard, I have to be honest, I'm getting frustrated with the platitudes. I'm getting frustrated with treating the Labor government of the past like it has a monopoly on being able to provide solid educational outcomes. In actual fact, the parlous state of the public education system is a product of the last 8 years' worth of Labor governance. And I think it's time to start facing up to that reality. Now, as I said, Stuart Park Primary School, one of my schools, excellent school, regarded, and I say this tongue-in-cheek, but slightly, in jest, but also semi-seriously, something of a Labor fortress. It's been a school that has been very socially progressive in many ways, but it is absolutely a school that is wonderfully led by Maria Albion. It is invested in continuous professional development. It is a place of significant, long-standing experience, dedicated, experienced staff, right? It is a place with stable enrolment numbers, consistent attendance in advance of 90%, in fact, at that school. It's even got a great school band, which I'm looking forward to playing with very much tomorrow at the Music Assembly, right? The fact is, it is an aberration. It is increasingly an aberration in our public schooling system. And when you look at the numbers and when you start looking at the metrics, you start to realise just how much damage has been done to our public education system and why there is a growth in independent and private schools in this place. Now, I'm not anti-private schools. I represent the elite private school in the Northern Territory, arguably, Haileybury Rendell School. And it's a fantastic school, fantastic opportunities, well run. I'm 100%, the other day, they had the surplus capacity to be able to take out Year 9s for Wellbeing Week to clean up trash in Charles Darwin National Park. Really great activity to be part of. But they also have fantastic numbers and scores and test results across the board. They are not failing our kids educationally. It's not just about infrastructure. It's not just about registration of teachers. It's actually about the end result outcome for kids. And I don't believe that at the moment we are facing up to the reality of that situation. And I think, as I say, in speaking about this today, it's an opportunity to face that reality as we move forward into a next phase of educational reform, which has been necessitated by the fact that we have dropped the ball on public education in particular in the Northern Territory over a long period of time now, and certainly over the best part of the last decade. Now, what are examples of that? Well, at a very basic level, again, if I talk about that primary school that I was at the very beginning of the year, that was a school, for all its successes, that didn't have working locks and keys and doors for basic security in its upper primary school. Now, the agility, and I thank the Minister for this, her responsiveness resulted in me being able to resolve minor capital works, and I'm grateful for her responsiveness and swift resolution, because the fact is those are not the kind of issues that schools should have to be wrestling with. They're just not. And so basic infrastructure deficits, as you know, that's just the tip of the iceberg. We can be talking about the fine details of, like, as I said, I read the additional reports, and the additional reports point to extra things that we could do in relation to teacher registration. But we have a bigger problem here, and the bigger problem is a function of educational failures by the previous government over the best part of a decade. The numbers just speak for themselves. That's the honest truth of it. The numbers speak for themselves. When Labor came to power in 2016, school attendance rates were on the other side of 80%. By the time they had finished their 2 terms of governance and been voted out, attendance had fallen to almost 70%. That is a significant metric. Again, we're worried about 1 percentile teacher registration stuff. Yes, it matters. But look at the bigger picture here. Look at the bigger picture of what needs to be done to create the architecture of opportunity in the Northern Territory again, because otherwise you are missing the wood for the trees. The fact is, after years of inaction by the former Labor government, the CLP government is actually progressing some pretty important secondary school reform, which is long overdue. Like a good half of us in this House are people who were beneficiaries of the old education system that provided that architecture of opportunity before we had the middle school rollback. And now, I don't want to hear it when it's going to be a case of you're rushing it, it's too fast, we can't keep up with it, how will we implement this? It's already overdue. And we won't compromise educational outcomes, but at the same time, the fact that a lot of this stuff is happening quickly and with a higher risk tolerance is because we recognise that this reform is necessary to create opportunity in the Northern Territory again. Yeah. That's the reality of it. To create opportunity in the Northern Territory again, you must actually invest in the things that work and take some chances. So far, there have been no great mistakes or missteps made in that space. And I say that particularly so in the education space. Another one, Minister Hersey presented a petition for 940 people to the last parliament calling for a dedicated special needs school for residents in Palmerston and the rural area. That was not a bad idea then, and it's not a bad idea now. And I'll have plenty to say when it comes to budget time and how we spend our money, but that's a good investment. That's a good investment, but it was not a suitable investment for political expediency purposes at the time. And now we are investing in something that actually makes sense in that regard. I don't even want to talk about the intensive support role, but the fact of the matter is, if you look at the numbers, they, again, speak for themselves. They were clearly used to make attendance figures look better than they were. And we're being transparent about those figures now. And I think it's important that we face up to what those numbers say. And it is pleasing that in Term 3 of 2025, we've seen 300 plus fewer kids on the ISR compared to a year ago in Term 3 of 2024. You know, we are increasing accountability mechanisms for parents whose children consistently fail to attend school. Will all the policy levers that we pull work? No, I don't actually believe they will. But will more of them work than if we just sit around twiddling our thumbs? Well, that I do believe is the case. And that's why I'm backing the totality of the package of educational reform being driven by the Minister. The CLP government has committed $1.9 million to, for example, employ school counsellors based in schools. We know we have, proportionate to our population, more public servants than anywhere else per capita. And we know that education is one of the spaces where it makes the least sense to have a concentration of people in Mitchell Centre when you actually need a bunch of people out in the ground in schools. And the school counsellors is an example of a good initiative in that regard. But look, the very worst of it all in my mind is the fact that under Labor, Territory kids have lagged behind the rest of the country when it comes to literacy and when it comes to numeracy. And that's why I don't want to be harsh about it, but we just cannot continue to all dance around those figures and talk about the 1 percentiles. You know, 1/3 of all NT students are categorised now as needing additional support in literacy and numeracy compared to 1 in 10 nationally. When I went to school here, when the Leader of the Opposition went to school here, we went to school in places that were proportionately per capita funded better than anywhere else in the country. We essentially had a public schooling system that was the envy of the rest of the country. We made prudent use of the money that we were gifted by the federal government in our education sector. And that's the great irony here, because yes, it is true that the former Labor government was able to secure money from the federal government, its fair share of the pie, as with everyone else. But then what did they do with it? What did they do with it to result in that standard of lit numbers falling? You know, our NAPLAN results under Labor showed 58% of all NT students, including 85% of Indigenous students, didn't meet basic literacy and numeracy standards. And that is why we have a focus on getting kids back to school via $14 million boosting literacy and numeracy plans, including, you know, embracing a consistent evidence-based approach centred around explicit teaching. It hasn't been pulled out of nowhere. It works elsewhere. The data and the evidence was out there. If the former government wanted to do something about it, they could have done something about it when they were in power, and they did not. Madam Speaker, the bottom line is the days of viewing public education as the remit of Labor, they're over. They're over in this place. I'm done with hearing about it. The fact is, whilst no doubt getting a cut of our National Education Accord, they have actually overseen the decline of public education in the Northern Territory. And there are innumerable fronts on which I could detail the argument, but one of the most compelling is the actual aggregate enrolment data in those last 8 years of governance. So if you go back to 2016, going with Term 1 data, there were 33,300 kids in schools, right? And then if you go to 2027, it goes up to 34,400, 2018, 34,300, 2019, 34,200, 2020, 34,500. It stays roughly consistent, but in real terms what that means is it's declining. And in that period, whilst Labor are failing our public education sector here, the private sector is having to pick up the slack. But the real telling data is when you start looking at what happens in the second term of the Gunner government. Look at that period of time, and what you'll see is a persistent decline in enrolment numbers. It goes from, in 2021, 34,600 to the following year, 34,400 to 33,000 to 32,000 to 32.5. Why has that happened? It's not proportionate to or commensurate with our population growth. It's not to do with that. It's to do with falling standards in our public education system overseen by the last Labor government, by the failure of the previous Labor government to actually manage the money they were given, to actually produce better educational outcomes for our kids. So all of this tinkering and additional reports, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything when there have been declining standards, declining numbers, and a declining architecture of opportunity. And that is what I'm really interested in here. The fact is, the architecture of opportunity in the Northern Territory has comprised, since the beginning of the setup of this place, public health, public housing, public infrastructure, and public education. Fail on those things, and you fail to grow the territory. You fail to grow the territory. I'm done with the historic romanticism and romanticisation rather than revisionism. Make no mistake, the erosion of that architecture is the product of Labor's poor choices over a decade. And it is the reason that there are 17 of us here and 4 of them left over there. That's the reality of it. The erosion of the architecture of opportunity. Now, returning to the teacher registration bill from earlier today, I'm not going to say that it's going to correct all of the failures in the education system. It's simply not, let alone all the structural failures created by the government, the Labor government, over the last 8 years. But it is a step. It is a step, and it's a step in the right direction. And it's one of many that this government is going to have to take in order to bring that architecture of opportunity back into accord, and in order to bring public education standards at a junior level and at a secondary level back to scratch. And it's an important time to be taking these steps, because 2026 is going to be an extremely significant year in education reform. The long overdue rectification of the middle school transition the necessary moves in child safety improvements and the strengthening of regulatory integrity, they are all long overdue. Now, this government is acting to improve public education, not just dealing in platitudes and feel-good stories and talking about the virtues of education in the abstract or our wonderful teachers. Yes, our teachers are wonderful. My teachers were wonderful. My father is a wonderful teacher. But I'm done with hearing the stories about wonderful teachers being the be-all and end-all of our system. There are systemic failures here that have made it impossible for our education system to succeed, and those systemic and structural failures must be addressed, and I believe will be addressed by this government going forward. The Minister in the ministerial report that we spoke of in the last parliamentary sitting said, and I wrote it down because I thought the quote was a good one, quote unquote, "Departments have had to be agile over the past year to set things in place. We have not just talked about it, we have acted." And that's what it's going to take now. So the gnashing of teeth, as I say, over the 1 percentile stuff, whilst virtuous, is the enemy of the good at this point, as far as I'm concerned. The prevarication and the bureaucratisation of public education in particular, but the education sector writ large, is a significant problem in the Northern Territory. And we may end up having the same conversation in regards to what Labor did with health, to what Labor did with public infrastructure. And we can keep talking about it, or we can do things about it, and that's what the government is getting on and actually doing. So I support the moves being made by the Minister for Education in this space. I think that we are taking calculated, positive chances to move things forward at a pace that they need to be moved forward now, because, quite frankly, we're watching otherwise a slow-motion spiral, and public education is not going to remedy itself. Public education and the education sector in general is only going to get back on its feet if we intervene and actually stimulate the sector at this point. So on that basis, Madam Speaker, I look forward to continuing the process of righting the wrongs done to public education over the last decade, and I commend this bill to the House.
Member for Berkeley.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I rise to speak in support of the Teachers Registration Amendment Bill 2025. Madam Speaker, the bill introduces many important reforms that I'm confident will have positive impact on the next generation of Territorians. As the member for Berkeley and the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, I'm particularly excited about the amendments that recognise the importance of Aboriginal teachers and the teaching of students in language, as well as amendments that will support many flexible employment options for local people in remote schools. Prior to the amendments today, Regulation 5, Sub-Regulation 3 of the Teacher Registration Regulations provides an exemption for a person to teach without meeting English language proficiency requirements if that person is only teaching a foreign language. This government understands that in the Territory's remote communities, English is often not the primary language spoken. It therefore does not make sense for English language proficiency to be a barrier to teaching first languages in community. The proposed amendment rewords the Act to replace the term foreign languages with languages other than English. This amendment clarifies that Aboriginal languages are included for the purpose of the exemption. In practice, this amendment ensures that Aboriginal teachers who hold deep cultural and linguistic knowledge are not excluded from the classrooms simply because English is not their first language. It removes unnecessary barriers to employment in remote schools and strengthens the pipeline of local educators who can teach children in their own language. The impact will be profound. Students will learn in ways that reflect their identity, culture and community, while schools benefit from teachers who bring lived experience and connection. Over time, this reform will help preserve Aboriginal languages, improve educational outcomes and build stronger bridges between communities and the education system. This important amendment is another step by the CLP government towards fixing our education system, not just in Darwin but right across the Northern Territory. I commend the Minister for bringing forward this amendment. Complementary to this change, which enables more local teachers to be employed in our remote communities, The bill also streamlines registration processes and provides greater flexibility for employers to engage unregistered teachers. That is, individuals who may not yet hold a full teaching qualification, such as those currently undertaking a teaching degree, can be employed to teach specialist subjects. This bill removes the limitation that the authority for a school to employ an unregistered teacher expires at the end of each calendar year. This change will enable the employment of valuable individuals that may just need more time to complete their formal qualifications. Madam Speaker, across the communities in my electorate alone, I know that for many students studying remotely, it is more difficult for them to complete formal education within standard timeframes. This amendment will allow remote teachers still in training to continue to be engaged through practical and paid classroom teaching without the need for additional bureaucracy. The Teacher Registration Amendment Bill complements the work already underway by this government and the Minister for Education to ensure better education outcomes for Aboriginal Territorians. Madam Speaker, this government, as part of the agreement, the $1.1 billion Better Fairer Schools funding, has committed to strengthen instruction of Aboriginal languages through the NT Indigenous Languages and Cultures curriculum, as well as greater recognition of Aboriginal educators' knowledge with the development of an Aboriginal workforce strategy that includes professional learning designed by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, and to increase the diversity of the education workforce, particularly security of employment for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff employed in schools. Madam Speaker, the amendments made in this bill make direct progress towards these outcomes in ensuring more Aboriginal teachers are able to work in our schools and teach their languages. The amendments made today will also strengthen the bilingual education programs that this government backed in 2025 with an additional $3.1 million in funding. These programs will now have greater access to teaching staff that were unable to teach language under the previous legislation. The bill makes important changes as well as delivers on our commitments to retaining and attracting teachers, improving education and getting kids back to school. Madam Speaker, I thank the Minister for Education for bringing this forward, and I commend this bill to the House. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers? Minister, in closing.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to touch on a few things that other members in their contributions. The member, and I thank all members for supporting the legislation before us this evening. The member for Guadja did talk about the importance of child safety and information sharing. I did think it was quite interesting that he spoke about integrity and transparency, and we don't need to go on about the restoring integrity to government that they had under their previous, when they were the government. So I don't think they have a lot to say in the integrity space, Madam Speaker. And the fact that we are bringing these changes, it is about making sure that we are being more transparent. And, you know, I just felt like it was, here we go again with another, you know, we were so great at our integrity and transparency when clearly they were not. He also mentioned about the consultation. The consultation has actually been over 12 months, and I'm not sure what also the detriment to the Aboriginal language teachers would be. We just heard from the member for Barkly as a remote and very remote areas that he goes to. You know, Clause 23 in actual fact strengthens the authority to teach, which is, he went on and elaborated about, you know, how that is necessary in some of those very remote settings to be able to get those language teachers in. And we've modified that so it's not just about a foreign language, it's in actual fact, you know, any language other than English. We also heard from the member for Fanny Bay, and I do note the member for Fanny Bay is someone who previously worked in the department, and I could certainly hear that passion throughout her contribution. The member for Johnson, again went on about the time frame of the consultation, which I think was actually quite generous. And we, in actual fact, want to protect the Aboriginal culture, and these changes do actually do that. So, and then the member for Johnson wanted to know, was I going to take it seriously? I can assure you, member for Johnson, everything to do with education, I absolutely take seriously. And I think there is a lot of things that we've done this year that have assured opposition and crossbench members that we are not about just saying we are going to make changes in education. We are actually getting on and doing that job. Thank you to the member for Fong Lim, who always eloquently gives a contribution. And part of strengthening, and this is part of strengthening and reforming our education. And as he spoke about, this is something that we have been doing over the last 15 months. And we, as a government and also the department, which I'd like to thank, have been very agile over the last 15 months. And as the member for Fong Lim said, we are actually acting on what we are doing. So, Madam Speaker, the CLP government is taking action to strengthen the teacher workforce and deliver on its commitments to keeping and attracting teachers, fixing education and getting kids back to school. Our government is committed to ensuring the efficiency and effectiveness of government agencies and delivering value for Territorians. One of our 3 key priorities is to rebuild the economy by enhancing efficiencies through streamlining processes and reducing administrative obstacles. This certainly helps. The Teacher Registration Amendment Bill 2025 amends the Teacher Registration Act 2004 and the Teacher Registration Regulations 2004. The proposed amendments are focused on the following key areas: strengthening the regulatory integrity of the Teacher Registration Board and the Office of the Board, mandating the registration of early childhood teachers, teaching and education and care services, improving national consistency for the registration of all teachers, and improving information sharing across jurisdictions. In the key points, child safety is strengthened by mandating professional registration for qualified teachers teaching in the early childhood education and care sector. This amendment will also strengthen the teacher workforce through attracting more early childhood education and care teachers to the teaching profession. The reform will also create flexibility for school principals to make resourcing decisions that respond to the needs of the school. The bill further strengthens child safety by improving information sharing arrangements. A provision is included in the bill that enables the board to share information kept on the register of teachers with teacher registration authorities in other jurisdictions, which includes the sharing of information that the board reasonably believes will prevent harm to a child. The bill strengthens child safety through information sharing provisions that address gaps highlighted by the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse, and further by the Child Safety Review conducted by the Australian Children's Education Care Quality Authority, or ACEQA. The bill will strengthen the regulatory integrity of the Teacher Registration Board and the Office of the Teacher Registration Board by clarifying the Minister's powers to set policy, performance and accountability expectations, and the CE of the agency is responsible for teacher registration and regulation to manage the performance of the Director of the Board. This amendment will result in increased trust and confidence in the operations of the Board and the Office of the Board. And I do note that some of the contributions had some concerns in that area, but this is about making sure it is more transparent and making sure that that board is more robust and accountable. The regulatory framework for teacher registration and regulation in the NT is amended to align with the national framework for teacher registration in Australia. This includes minimum qualification currency of practice and English language proficiency requirements. These amendments support national consistency, making it easier for the NT to attract teachers from other jurisdictions. Amendments in the bill ensure Aboriginal languages are captured as a specialist subject eligible for an employer to apply for an authority to employ an unregistered person to teach on behalf of a person who does not hold the required qualifications for registration. This amendment recognises the importance Aboriginal teachers bring with teaching of students in their first language and supports flexible employment options for remote schools. And I do note that was one of the concerns that came up as well from the member for Guadja, from the member for Johnson spoke about that as well. We actually have 9 bilingual schools, Madam Speaker, and this again, as the member for Berkeley spoke about in his contribution, will help strengthen that as well. The bill will streamline registration processes and create greater flexibility for employers to seek an authority to employ an unregistered person to teach specialist subjects. For example, vet trainers, language teachers, and individuals working towards their teaching qualifications. Administrative burden is reduced by removing the limitation that an authority to employ an unregistered person expires at the end of each calendar year. Now, this is something when we came into government, Madam Speaker, we had quite a few people getting in contact with, and there was a real blockage at the end of the school year when everyone was due to renew their registration. It's a holiday period, there's not as many people there at work, and there were some people that just could not get that registration renewed. So this will actually enable the board to set the period of an authority to align with the relevant circumstances of employment up to a maximum of 2 years, or as prescribed by the regulations. The member for Guadja and Johnson shared concerns from the committee hearings about the governance and independence of the board, and I think I've just gone over that then. These reforms clarify existing roles and responsibilities through the PSEMA. The director of TRB, the Teacher Registration Board, is a public sector employee under the PSEMA and a statutory officer. They must be employed by an agency, in this case, the Department of Education and Training. The Chief Executive of Education and Training is responsible for the Director's accountability and performance only. The Board is the regulatory authority and reports to me as the Minister. Authority to teach concerns are unfounded as to employ an Aboriginal member for language and to remove the use of the term foreign language. This term is outdated and this change makes it more contemporary. As Aboriginal teachers are employed under this area and generally are an elder and hold cultural responsibility to the area, these decisions can be made by the school community for that employment. Some other efficiencies are moving from a paper-based manual application, which is outdated, to a new ICT automated system that will be in place by September 1st, 2026. Streamlining the process and making it more efficient is part of our government's mandate to cut red tape and remove some administrative burdens. And I commend the bill to the House, Madam Speaker.
The question is the bill be now read a second time. Those of that opinion say aye, to the contrary no. No. I think the ayes have it. The clerk.
Amend the Teacher Registration Northern Territory Act 2004 and the Teacher Registration Northern Territory Regulations 2004.
I seek leave to move the third reading.
Is leave granted?
Nothing. No.
No? Okay. Leave is not granted. We will move into the consideration in detail stage.
Good evening, honourable members. Order. The Assembly will consider the Teacher Registration Northern Territory Legislation Amendment Bill 2025 Serial 41. Member for Quadra, would you like to indicate any particular clauses you'd like to?
Yes, thank you, Mr Deputy Chair. I've just got two questions on Clause 8.
Clause 8? Okay. Thank you. So on that basis, can I ask, is it the wish of the Assembly that clauses 1 to 7 be considered together? Aye. There being no objection, it is so ordered. The question is that clauses 1 to 7 stand as printed. Those of that opinion say aye, to the contrary no. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The question is that clause 8 stand as printed. No. Member for Quadra.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Minister, I just wanted to ask you two questions in relation to Clause 8. How will the hierarchy of approval or conflict be managed when a ministerial direction is given to the board, and if the direction conflicts with the director of the board as well as the CE?
Yeah, can you just explain that more?
Yeah, so essentially you're going to have the director of the teacher registration board, and they could get a direction from the board, and they could also get a direction from the CE, of which are in conflict of one another. How's the hierarchy work of the director is being told by the board to do one thing, but by the chief executive or the minister to do another? What's the hierarchy of approvals or direction?
First of all, the minister can't intervene in the board matters.
Yep.
So that's...
So the chief executive and the board.
Yeah, so there won't be any conflict because the CE only directs the director under the PACEMA.
Yeah, so what you're saying is there's no grounds for the chief executive to ever direct the director in contradiction to what the board have directed the person?
Yeah, no.
Okay, thank you. Just that was some stuff that some stakeholders wanted us to confirm. And Minister, how will perceived, real and possible conflict be managed when the board is both the regulator and the employer of teachers?
Do you mean the department? Because the board doesn't actually employ the teachers?
I guess it's going to the heart of what we've heard from people from the inquiry and past the date of the inquiry is the real possible and potential conflict bringing it in when the Department of Education employs teachers, and now the Department of Education is going to have the Teacher Registration Board sitting within it. How's it going to manage that perceived conflict?
Yeah, so as I said, the director has been, the director has always been an employee of the agency. The minister has a responsibility of that board. Yeah, I don't think there is no conflict of interest under that.
Yeah, so I'm just ascertaining you're bringing the Teacher Registration Board into arm's length, as it's referred to, into the department. So what is the process for mitigating any real perceived or possible conflict that they are working in together and that there's the independence? Because that's obviously the issue that's being raised, is people saying that bringing it in removes that element of independence.
So the CEO is responsible for the performance of employees within the department with respect to upholding the code of conduct and performance under the PACEMA. And while there is a direct relationship between the department and the office of the board, the department cannot interfere with the statutory powers of the board.
Thank you, Minister. And can you confirm, can the Minister override a decision of the board?
No.
Thank you.
Any further questions, member?
No further questions.
Okay. Is it the...
At all?
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Do you want me to ask you one?
The question is that clause 8 stand as printed. Those of that opinion say aye, to the contrary no. Aye. I think the ayes have it. Is it the wish of the Assembly that the remainder of the bill be taken together?
Yes.
There being no objection, it is so ordered. The question is that the remainder of the bill stand as printed. Those of that opinion say aye, to the contrary no. Aye. I think the ayes have it. The question is that the bill be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye, to the contrary no. Aye. I think the ayes have it. Minister.
I move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is, the bill be now read a third time. Those of that opinion say aye, to the contrary no. I think the ayes have it.